Drifting is kind of like that person that you knew in high school that had serious talent, but you could never really pin if they were going to do anything with it, right? It's like that untapped talent. Then one day you wake up and realize that their name is Kenny Hoopla and they're crushing it with a ton of fans. That's how a lot of people felt in Appleton, Wisconsin, which is super far away from pretty much everyone else, but that's the only analogy I know. And there's a bit of history of that sort of thing in drifting, especially here in the States. I'm Alex, Alex.Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and I'm over here on Torque Motorsport to speak on behalf of things that you may not know about drifting. By the way, don't forget to subscribe and let us know what you want us to talk about next. We got a whole bunch of new stuff going on. We've got all sorts of crazy things like podcasts, shorts, we're doing drift events, we're taking the team out to try and learn how to drift, and it'd mean a lot if you followed along and supported. Now, let's get into some drifting for dummies, or just something that you maybe might need to know if you're on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Or maybe it's like a, well, did you know moments in the garage? Because a lot of times guys and gals do like to do that every once in a while to prove that they know more than somebody else. So let me help you with that moment of reflection and bliss. Okay, first things first, drifting has actually been around on the books for about half a century, at least in terms of what we would deem actual drifting. The name of Kunimitsu Takahashi is probably familiar to you if you try to understand more about drifting past just the Adam LZ portion being in it. Now, a previous motorcycle racer turned car driver when he experienced a crash in 1962. Mr. Takahashi began to race cars as a result of that and actually caught attention of the world. When he would go at corners almost at full speed, he essentially hit the apex of this corner and create an insane slip angle, which is essentially the angle of the car slipping to actually get into the corner the right way. This is where he referred to it as drifting. And then with throttle control out to turn the exit as fast as possible to then get ready for the next turn. He essentially straightened his car through a turn even while the car was going sideways. And this earned him a ton of awards and a ton of trophies. And while it was unconventional, this allowed Mr. Takahashi to maximize what he could do with basic ply tires at the time, because a lot of times the restrictions wasn't necessarily in the driving behavior, but the technology. Now that we know that Japan founded the concept and the initial success of drifting, but a lot of people may not know is how it actually became popularized in America, all the way to the point where it's now larger in the States than Japan by a lot of different marks. Now, that's not to say that Japan isn't also huge, but it's just a reference point. Japanese drifting and American drifting have some very fundamental differences, and it's some really important aspects to really understand. One of which is that in Japanese drifting culture, there's some incredible legacy that values style and respect to control and flow than in the States, where there seems to be just a little bit more focus on crazy smoke and horsepower. You'll see quite a few drifters really enjoy that element of Japanese drifting culture and the humility and respect that comes from it. This is why you tend to see 2 very different elements in drifting, even here in the States, between grassroots drifting and professional drift. Even the drift king himself, Mr. Tsuchiya, doesn't even like using a hydro brake at all. You can see it in some of the videos where he drives newer drift cars. He prefers to power over or even clutch kick. The only time he states he'd ever even use a hydro in drifting as of 2022 was to prevent the front end of the car actually hitting a barricade in case he did lose control. And you'll hear a lot of that because there's not as much power. Japanese pro drifters have a heavier element in the technical tracks and flow, whereas a lot of American drift tracks require way more power and way more speed because of the larger sweeping turns, because a lot of tracks here in the States are actually much bigger. And this fundamental difference in the pro scene is seen even here on the streets in the United States. Both have their places, both are incredible, but both are very different. The foundation of regular drifting in Japan was easier as well because of platform availability. You had Japanese car enthusiasts being able to jump into cars that had SR20s and Turbo 4s pretty much being offered from factory versus needing to be a swap here in the United States. Because of this, Japanese car enthusiasts could go out and just drift their everyday car and swap out tires on occasion, whereas here in the States, the swap typically meant a second car. Swaps also meant adding more power and more modifications because it was the age old, well, since we're in there, that ultimately ended up leading to more and more power coming out of these US drifting plants rather than the Japanese variants. I don't think one is inherently better than the other, but there really is a core difference between the two in terms of vision. But that should just give people more excitement to go out there and practice. People think nowadays that you need a massively large horsepower, dedicated drift car, a ton of power, a tire sponsorship, and so much more to just get out there and get practice. And while it does require a little bit of cash to start, specifically here in the States, probably more so than it does elsewhere, you don't need much to get out there and just practice and find those local tracks where these things are actually going on. I've seen people sliding stock G35s, throwing together 350Zs, and wonky Corvettes even that just happen to be found at a junkyard, and every single time you see them sliding around a corner, they just have the biggest damn smile on their faces, and they're just like, I'm really doing it, I'm really doing it, which is the best part of drifting, especially when you're new. What people didn't know about drifting is just that. You can do it and you can get out there, but to get good and to get that noise, it does require some practice. So find those local tracks, find those local events, grab whatever you can and go slide. Practice, make friends, and do anything it takes to actually get out there and just get some experience. Even nowadays, the SR20 swaps, the 1JZ swaps, and more can be pricey, but there's more to drifting than just trying to find a $20,000 240 right now. Drifting is more about the desire to practice and have fun than it is to be perfect. You'll find that in the communities surrounding the sport. And those are some things that you may not think of when you look at drifting. But what's one thing that you probably know that other people may not? Let me know below, and of course, thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex over here on Torque Motorsport. We hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you'd like to see on the next time, and we will see you, adios. We will see you later. There was a word that was supposed to be in there, and then it disappeared in my brain. Goodbye.